Hello, this is Maureen Julian. Today we're going to start Chapter 4 on space groups. The concept of space groups is introduced to study the organization of the symmetry operations when we add translations. And here's our seagull who's going to accompany us. For this chapter you will need the student edition of the International Tables, which I had you get. And the whole idea here is in the point groups, we just looked at individual molecules or birds or objects, but we didn't organize them in a periodic way. But with the space groups, we organize our gulls in a periodic way. We've had lattices before, and now we're going to show how each Bravais lattice has a point group that describes its symmetry. Ultimately, the descriptive classification of a lattice is determined by its symmetry. And the 5 two-dimensional Bravais lattices are oblique, rectangular primitive, rectangular centered, square, and hexagonal. You recognize the oblique, the rectangular, the square, and the hexagonal from the point groups, and now we're giving them the same names because they're related, only we have two different Bravais lattices. With the rectangular lattice, we have a primitive and a centered. All the rest of these are also, we're going to consider the primitive form of it. So the primitive oblique lattice, the symbol MP is the official symbol. I'm not going to have you memorize it. All I want you to know is the P at the end, which is primitive. So an oblique lattice has the symmetry of point group 2. This is the least symmetry a 2D lattice can have, and only the identity and the twofold operations are present. You can see each lattice point, these are all lattice points, they each have a twofold. And you can demonstrate this by tracing the lattice onto a separate sheet of paper and rotate it about any point. One of the students has made a program for this, and I promise I'll use it, but I just haven't gotten to do that. To demonstrate, okay, so the lattice parameters that you have to measure here would be A, B, and gamma, the angle between them. And the oblique lattice has a twofold lattice axis, or twofold axis at each lattice point. And the resulting pattern is, as you rotate it, if you forget about how we've indexed it, the patterns are the same after the rotation. So now let's look at the rectangular primitive. Here we have a rectangular lattice. It has symmetry 2mm. You can see the two folds and the mirrors. Here's the two folds. Of course, we carry from the previous one, and the mirrors are going to be here and here. So any single lattice point has a twofold axis and two perpendicular mirrors. And now, since the two axes are perpendicular to one another, always in this primitive lattice, the angle between them will always be 90 degrees. So if you have a rectangular lattice, all you have to measure are A and B. The other rectangular lattice is centered, and you can see you can measure the A and the B centered lattice, or we could consider a rhombus, which the A double prime, B double prime, and gamma prime. Now the A and the A double prime and B double prime will be the same, and so we have to measure the two parameters if we're going to index it along the primitive cell, or the rhombohedral cell, which is primitive. We need A and gamma. If we're going to use the rectangular centered, we're going to use A and B. The standard is to use the perpendicular axes. So the lattice has the symmetry of point group 2mm. You need to measure the A and B because the gamma will be always constant. If you use the rhombic cell, you also have to parameters to measure. And here's the transformation between the two, between the A and B of the centered cell and A prime, gamma prime of the rhombus shaped cell. So we have two lattice point. The rectangular cell is going to have two lattice points in the unit cell, and the rhombic cell is primitive. The point group of the lattice is independent of the choice of the basis vectors. Now we can move to the square. We have a symmetry 4mm. We have a fourfold and 4 mirror planes like our 4mm, if you look back to the point group chapter. So all you have to do is measure the A, because the A equals the B, and the gamma will always be 90 degrees. So we only measure lattice parameter A. And finally, the hexagonal lattice, we can actually index that in two ways. Usually we use the one on the left. It has the 120 degrees between A and B. We can have a centered cell on the right. It's always nice to know there's another alternative there. The symmetries require us to measure A and B, and the fact that it's hexagonal, the angle gamma is precisely 120. It will not vary from cell to cell if the cell is hexagonal, so we do not need to measure that. So we need to measure the A. And the A prime, B prime will give you a centered cell. The AB will give you a primitive cell. So to summarize, here's oblique P, here's rectangular P, rectangular centered, square P, and hexagonal P. That's the whole shebang. The oblique P has a point group of 2, because remember, the point group can be of this object. This object will, even though the object itself is infinite, the point group is just 2. The rectangular will be 2mm, the square will be 4mm, the hexagonal will be 6mm, and also both rectangular P and C are 2mm. Now we can summarize this on this slide, where you can see here's the names of the crystal systems, here's the names of the Bravais lattices, and if we look at the corresponding G matrix, you can see to calculate this G matrix, all we need is A, B, and gamma. For the oblique, for the rectangular, we just need A and B. For the square, we just need A. And for the hexagonal, we just need A as well, only we know that we have a, the lattice has a primitive cell, rather has a point group of 6mm. So you have the angle of 120 degrees. That's where you get this cosine of 120 degrees is minus a half, remember, from long ago. Now we're going to look at translation. We add translation. Here are the birds translating along. And let's get a little cleaned up definition of translation. Translation is an operation where every point of an object is displaced. So here we have a point along for our leaf, and it's displaced so that the position after the displacement minus the original position is going to produce the lattice. For example, U and V do not necessarily have to be integers. The green plant translates by a displacement factor of t minus 2, 2, and you can check that out. So you go 1, 2 in A, so it's 1, 2 up in this direction minus A, and then 2 along B. So it's 1, 2 along B, 1, 2 along B to get to this point here, and that's our translation. The lattice point would be minus 2, 2. Now we're going to come and talk about space groups. Space group is the symmetry of a regularly repeating infinite pattern. The space group is a mathematical description of the symmetries of a crystal structure. Since it is assumed that the crystal never ends, edge effects are not considered, such as faces or anything like that. So we consider it, we're really into the center of into the deep part of the lattice. A nickname for the two-dimensionals are called the wallpaper groups. And finally, in this group, we will always use, in this book rather, we will always use the term space group for either 2 or 3 dimensions. Now, an overview. There are 17 two-dimensional space groups. Every space group has a unique point group associated with it. The first 13 space groups are generated by combining each point group, the 10 point groups, which has a finite order, with an appropriate Bravais lattice, which has an infinite order. These are the simorphic space groups. The simorphic space group has at least one point in each unit cell with the symmetry of its associated point group. I don't expect you to get this right now, but I'm giving you this as part of the overview. We'll come back and look at this in detail shortly. The two-dimensional space groups, we want to see the relationship, the overview of the Bravais lattice and the point groups. So the Bravais lattice oblique is going to be primitive, and it has 2 point groups associated with it, 1 and 2. So the associated space groups would be P1 and P2. Rectangular primitive is going to have what? Yes, PM and P2MM. Rectangular centered, which is the next one, you do it. What is that going to have? Yes, you do it. Come on, turn this off and then figure it out. It's CM and C2MM. The square is going to be 4M and P4MM. And now we have another interesting thing when we get to the hexagonal. It's hexagonal P, so we're going to put a P in front of all of these. We have P3, P6, and P6MM. But remember, when we had 3M, we could parameterize it either by putting the mirror along the long axis or the short axis, and we had P1M and PM1, and so that will give us actually 2 space groups. So depending on how you pack it, and we'll look at that and see that as we come along, but I just want you to get this overview. So that gives us our 13 simorphic space groups, and so we have our 6 point group operations and a new operation, and these are the cyclic groups, and a new operation is needed that includes translation, and we're going to call this a glide, and it's the product of a mirror and a translation. It's not found in the point groups. This is special to the space groups, and the symbol is G. So the glide is going to give us another set of space groups, and they are called the non-simorphic space groups, and they are the logical complement of the simorphics. So, and as I said, this is just an overview. I want you to know what's coming. So here we have the simorphic groups, which we've seen. We've just gotten them by adding the point group to the lattice, to the P or the C in this case, the Bravais lattice. And now we have we have 1, 2, 3, 4 non-simorphic space groups, all of which contain glides in the as a necessary part of the symmetry, and they appear in the name of the point group.